Hello, everyone. We are today going to be covering a conspiracy theory type topic. It's not too complicated, and um, frankly, it's a little bit tangential to our course. So, as we move through this, I would pay attention. I might even consider taking notes on some of this stuff, but the way this is going to show up for you on a test is probably going to be, as I've done in the past, I will give you options for short answer questions. This will most likely show up as an option for one of your short answers. So this isn't technically part of our curriculum. It's something I decided to cover because lots of people have asked about it, and it's kind of interesting. But as it's not part of our curriculum specifically, you won't be tested on this too like intensely. But the question today we're covering, as you can see, is was Jesus married? There is partially, I think, due to the Da Vinci Code, which is a book that came out that talks about some of these the pseudepigraphy that you all just looked at in the Shobi. He uses some of those documents in his writing, and because these are real documents that really exist, people buy into his writing. He is a writer of fiction, but people really buy into his writing and think that it's true, because then they get on and they Google the Gospel of Peter or the Gospel of Mary, and they're just like, oh my goodness, these things really exist. He has evidence. Oh my goodness, there's a conspiracy. Jesus was married and there was a cover-up. So what we're going to do today is basically lay out all of the evidence that Jesus might have been married, and then basically make a counter argument and see if we can come to a conclusion about whether or not we think he was married. I will go ahead and put my cards on the table and say I feel very strongly that he was not married, and I will proceed to make that argument. You're welcome to argue back with me if you want, but let's get started. So, was Jesus married? We've got this. We've got a couple of documents. This is basically going to be it. We've got the Gospel of Peter, which shows up a lot in the Da Vinci Code. You all already kind of got to the core of the issue with the Gospel of Peter, hopefully, in the Shobi. We'll talk more about that in a minute. There's also this papyrus fragment that was found recently. I wrote in the PowerPoint last year. It was not found last year. It was found several years ago. I think this is just an old PowerPoint. But this papyrus fragment is it's called the Gospel of Mary, but what it actually is, and you're looking at it, this is an actual picture of the quote-unquote Gospel of Mary. It is literally a corner torn out of a page from a document. We don't even know what it is. The rest of the document's been lost. All we have is this tiny little ripped off piece of the page, and it's actually about the size of the thing you're looking at right now in the PowerPoint. It's tiny. It's like the size of a business card. And there's no complete sentences in it. We have these little snippets of sentences, and we try to piece together using deductive reasoning what it was about, and we really just don't know. So one of these snippets that we find in the Gospel of Mary is this line: Jesus said to them, "My wife," quote unquote, and that's all we got. We have these like little snippets, and that's the Gospel of Mary. This is the thing people are going crazy about, and the only line that we actually have here that even references Jesus is, Jesus said to them, "My wife." But it does seem to indicate that maybe Jesus did have a wife, so we're going to give it the benefit of the doubt. There's another reason, though, that people say Jesus was married. His followers called him rabbi. Now, rabbi was a common word for a teacher in Judaism. Rabbis were traditionally married. It would have been very strange for a rabbi not to be married. In fact, for that matter, it would have been strange for any Jewish man not to be married. Marriage was a very common thing. Nowadays, it's pretty normal for someone to just decide they want to be single, and that's fine. That's their decision. At the time of Jesus, it would not have been looked at as a normal thing. You were kind of really supposed to get married. So most people are married. Rabbis are definitely married. So the fact that Jesus is a Jewish man and he's called a rabbi by his followers really just seems likely he would have been married, right? So this is basically this is all of the arguments. We've got the Gospel of Peter. Oh, which I didn't mention to you. The Gospel of Peter. It doesn't say he was married, but it does depict Jesus having kind of a flirtatious thing with Mary Magdalene. I think it references that they would like kiss sometimes. So it's not really saying that he was married to her, but it does seem to indicate he had kind of like a, a flirty thing going on with her. Nevertheless, here are the arguments, or these are the arguments that Jesus was married. So let's talk about the arguments against. Yeah, so this is my answer. Probably not. The first argument I'm going to make that Jesus probably wasn't married is, who cares? If Jesus had been married, would it actually make a difference to Christian theology? He didn't have any kids, so the birthright still ends with Jesus. Yes, if he had had kids, that would have been an issue, but he didn't have any kids. So if he had been married, if he had had a wife, who cares? What does it matter? It doesn't change anything really about what we believe of Jesus. And again, I'll probably come back to this later. The other thing we have to ask is the authors. The authors of these documents are a little bit suspicious. They're suspect. And we have to ask what their intent is. And part of the reason we do this is through a process called carbon dating, where we can determine the age of the document. And that's slightly cut off, but is their agenda maybe unrelated to Jesus's wife? Could they be maybe pushing for something else? So we'll start here with the Gospel of Peter. As you know, the Gospel of Peter was written around, I put 130, and I think in the Shobi it was 150. It doesn't matter, roughly the same time. It was written in the 2nd century. This is ancient. It was a really long time ago. It doesn't seem like a huge difference to us now, but I think if you do some simple math, you will realize that Peter, who was roughly the age of Jesus, would have had to have been like 130 or 150 to have written this document. Not only that, Peter already recorded the story of Jesus's life through with the help of a man who helped him write his gospel, Mark. And third, we know that Peter was illiterate. So we've got really 3 things going against the Gospel of Peter. Peter was illiterate. Okay, well, maybe Peter learned to write later. Well, Peter had already written his gospel. Okay, maybe he had left some things out, learned to write, and then wrote something down. Last argument, he would have had to have been 150. Doesn't make any sense. The math doesn't add up. What we do know about this time period, though, in the 2nd century, is that there was a kind of cult that was starting called Docetism. And Docetism believed that Jesus was God. So far, so good. But they also believed that while being God, Jesus was never really a human. That Jesus was sort of a hologram or an illusion that God created, sort of like, his this illusion puppet that walked around on earth and said and did things for him. They believe that Jesus only appeared to be human. And part of this belief meant that when he was crucified, that he didn't feel any pain. And we actually see in the Gospel of Peter that there are many places where it talks about this sort of Docetist teachings. So it says here, he remained silent when he was on the cross, as though he felt no pain. It's clearly a Docetist belief system, which again happened in the 2nd century. So it seems like what's happening here, and this is a great example of pseudepigraphy, is that these people are trying to push their ideas, and as a way of doing this, they are pretending to have the true, quote, I'm using air quotes here, true Gospel of Peter. So they're writing under his name to try to, get their word out there, which of course is not true. All right, this fragment, which is called the Gospel of Mary, for who knows why. It's this tiny little piece of paper. It was written between 300 and 400 AD. We have no idea who wrote it. We have no idea why they wrote it. I'm even going to go so far as to point this out. Jesus was not that uncommon of a name at the time. So the fact that the document says Jesus something something his wife, do we even know that this is the Jesus we're talking about? Like, this could just be somebody's diary and their neighbor was named Jesus, so they're talking about their neighbor's relationship with his wife. I mean, like, we have no idea what this document is or where it came from, who wrote it. It just really, we kind of just have to throw this one out. We don't know. And let's, for the sake of argument, even pretend that this is a writing about Jesus who was married. You have to ask, why is the first reference to Jesus's wife only showing up here in 300s, 400s AD? No one before wrote about it. That doesn't make any sense. Moving on. A lot of people want Jesus to be married because they think it would be an argument for women or for feminism. And specifically, they want Mary Magdalene to be Jesus's wife. I think because she is a very popular female figure in the Bible, and a lot of people want her to be this kind of feminist icon. Partially because I think she was a leader in the early church. She led a Christian church all on her own. A lot of people say she was the most likely candidate to be Jesus's wife because she hung out with him and she was single, so whatever, I don't know. Many people, I already said this, many people want her to be the wife of Jesus because it would be a symbol for feminism. I'm actually going to take the counter argument position here. I actually think it weakens Mary Magdalene as a character to say that she possibly was Jesus's wife, and here's why. First of all, we know that her last name, so to speak, was Magdalene, and we talked about this before, but Magdalene means from Magdala. And as you know, women were always associated by the closest male relative in their life. So first things first, if Mary was married to Jesus, she would have been referred to as Mary, the wife of Jesus. If she had a father or a brother nearby, she would have been Mary, the daughter of, Mary, the sister of. The fact that she's called Mary Magdalene means A, she's from Magdala, B, she's traveling, she's not in Magdala now, and C, and most importantly, it means she's single. It means she's traveling on her own accord. She's doing everything she's doing because she wants to. She, in a way, is, she doesn't need a man in her life. She's doing all of this on her own. Which leads me to my final point. I actually think it would kind of undermine her as a feminist character to argue that she was actually Jesus's wife, because Mary Magdalene goes on to be a significant leader in the church. So why does she need to be married to Jesus? If she was married to Jesus, you could then say, oh, well, she was just doing what her husband told her to do. Isn't it so much stronger doesn't it make her so much stronger of a feminist character to look at this woman who was single at a time when it was uncommon to be single, and she may have even been looked down upon for choosing that lifestyle, and then she chooses to go and be a Christian leader on her own, not because a man told her to, but because she wants to do it on her own. So anyway, I don't really understand the argument that Mary Magdalene would be a stronger feminist character if she was married to Jesus. That doesn't make any sense to me. What it comes down to basically is that there's only two reasons that Jesus's wife wouldn't have been mentioned in the scriptures. And they are option A, the disciples covered it up. It was this big conspiracy. They didn't want word of Jesus's wife getting out, so they said, we'll do a cover up and no one will ever know. Which, fine, we'll take a look at that. And then option B is the reason she's not mentioned in the Bible is because she's so boring, so commonplace, so background of a character that it just doesn't, they didn't see any reason to put her in the Bible. It's sort of, we talked about how Jesus kind of disappears for 18 years of his life. We have a story about him when he was 12, and then the next story isn't until he's 30. So a lot of stuff could have happened in there, right? Like he could have gotten married, and they just didn't write about any of it. And just like they thought his job as a carpenter was kind of boring and all the other stuff he did was boring, maybe they thought his wife was kind of boring, so they just left her out. So those are the two main arguments that Jesus had a wife, but she still didn't show up in the Bible. The issue, though, is that both of these are fine arguments, or seem to be fine arguments on the surface, but when we really start to dig deeper into them, we realize some problems. So let's start with the cover-up. If the disciples covered it up, why did they cover it up? Because we already said at the beginning, he was a Jewish man, he was a rabbi. It was totally normal for him to have a wife. There's no issue here. I think there's this misconception that Christianity needs Jesus to be single, and if he wasn't single, if he was married, that somehow, ruins Christianity, which isn't true at all. I mean, any of you who are Christian, if you just think about it, what would it matter if Jesus had a wife? It wouldn't matter at all. There'd be another character in the Bible, and who cares? It's just it just would be, he would have been married, and it wouldn't make a difference. The next thing or the next possible reason they covered it up is, okay, well, some of the apostles were really sexist. They don't like all of these positive female role models in the story, so they want to edit them out. They want to, cut out all these female characters. If that's the issue, and I will grant you that some of the apostles would have been sexist because of the time period, why did they then go and include all of Jesus's other feminist teachings? It's specifically Luke, who focuses on these moments. And in fact, if you look at people like Luke, who's focusing on all the feminist characters, you would actually expect him to pay more attention than normal to Jesus's wife. Like, he would definitely zero in on it. But why include all those feminist ideologies if you were trying to cover up the role of women? It doesn't make sense. Lastly, you may be familiar with the saying, two people can keep a secret as long as one of them is dead, which is kind of true. As soon as you tell one person your secret, it's going to get out. It just does. People are bad at keeping secrets. And when you're talking about a cover-up of a major character, then this woman would have been a major character, being married to Jesus, how on earth was this cover-up so successful? You're talking about hundreds of people who would have known she existed, and they all conspire to not write about her in the Gospels. They all conspire to cover it up, and then it works? Like, that's insane. The first mention we have of his wife isn't until 300, 400 AD. Like, that's crazy talk. Like, people are not good at keeping secrets. So the idea that they were able to keep this a secret is just unbelievable to me. Okay, so let's move to the other column. If the disciples thought it was normal, then why not mention her, especially at some of these really significant moments in his life, like when he's on the cross? In the Gospels, we see Jesus he's hanging on the cross, he's dying, and in his last moments, he asks the one. I mentioned earlier that John, the apostle, was the only apostle who stayed with Jesus all the way until the end. That is true of the men, though it's worth mentioning, and I should have mentioned this before when I was talking about it. Many of the women do stay. So his mother's there, Mary Magdalene's there, there's several women there. John's the only one of the dudes who actually stays. All the other guys run away. So John's there, and Jesus from the cross asks John to take care of his mother, which is it's a sweet moment, and it's a really important moment because Jesus is trying to make sure that his loved ones are going to be taken care of after he's gone. So he tells John, take care of his mother, and John says, okay. Although it's a very sweet moment, you kind of have to wonder, like, why was this the thing that needed to be included in the Bible? Because it is kind of unimportant to the overall story. And yet in this moment, as we're recording this, like, last will and testament of Jesus, he doesn't say anything about taking care of his wife, who he would be leaving a widow. So that's kind of weird. He says, John, take care of my mother. And John says, okay, is there anyone else you want me to take care of? And Jesus is just like, nope, that's it. So it would be weird if he had a wife. And again, I'm sorry, the camera's covering up the words. But why also focus on all these feminist ideologies without paying attention to Jesus's wife? Luke, for example, focuses so much on all these women in the Gospels. Luke, as you know, was a feminist. Wouldn't you think, if that was your focus for your Gospels, that the one character you would really want to pay special attention to was Jesus's wife? Like, you're trying to push out this guy's feminist message. You would definitely look at how he treats his wife. Look at what their relationship is like. Like, it's a classic, or like, it's just a perfect moment for trying to, if you're trying to write about these positive female role models. So it's like, probably more than anything, it's weird that Luke doesn't mention anything. Which again comes back to my argument that there just wasn't a woman. There wasn't someone to mention. So conclusion, Jesus was not married. This is my belief. But I want to reemphasize, this is not something that I feel like I have to believe, because if it turns out that he was married, it would crush my beliefs or crush my religion. I think that this would not impact Christianity at all. If one day someone finds Q and we find this like indisputable evidence that Jesus absolutely was married, I mean, I'm going to hear about it. I'm going to be like, oh, cool. Like, we found out something new, but I'm not, like, it's not going to change anything. In terms of theology, Jesus' teachings all stay the same. The fact that he died for our sins, Christians believe he died for our sins, that stays the same. It just doesn't change any of our beliefs. So I don't have anything to gain by, covering up or hiding the fact that he had a wife. I just don't see the evidence for it. So that concludes our lesson for today. Hopefully you completed the Shobi already. You must have completed the Shobi already. I will, if you have any questions, I don't think we're doing any kind of discussion today. So if you have any questions, you can certainly send me an email, and I will see you next class.